Hey everyone, welcome back to the Boys in Motion podcast. I'm Andrew, joined by Tyler and Brian, and today we're going to tackle the topic that's crucial for every endurance athlete, and that is recovery between high intensity sessions.
Understanding how to recover properly isn't just about feeling good. It's about maximizing that performance and preventing those dreadful injuries.
You're absolutely right. I remember pushing through back-to-back intense sessions on back-to-back days without adequate rest, thinking that I was just being hard, building nice strength, but instead I ended up sidelined with fatigue. And that's not what you want when you're trying to build up towards a race. Recovery is a game changer, but it's also one of those things that's really tough to have top of mind all of the time. And when it comes to intensity spread around your training plan, it's something you should be thinking about when you set that up.
100%, especially if you're trying to ramp up during a training block, but all you want to do is go up, but you have to plug in those recovery days.
Now, Brian, you shared this article with us, and that was, are you recovering adequately between high intensity workouts? So let's just set the stage here, and we'll go through all of the different workout intensity levels to kind of give a context of what we're talking about here. And to kick it off, the one that Tyler and I are definitely in, well, more me than Tyler, because Tyler's putting in some serious work this week, and I'm all confused, and I keep forgetting it was a B race for him. But that is level 1, and that is recovery. So think your warm-ups, your reps before you actually get into a main rep and set, your cool down, a nice recovery session by itself. So that's rate of perceived exertion 1 or 2. This is really easy. Zone 1, just going out for a nice jog, cycle, whatever.
Yeah, and that's great. And you used a kind of technical term that maybe if people haven't heard it before, it's worth explaining, which is rate of perceived exertion. You'll see that oftentimes in the literature as RPE, and it's a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the very easiest and 10 being all out max. So as we go through these levels of kind of different efforts, we'll use that RPE to kind of define that stress on your body. Tyler, what's the second one? Because you're the king of this second level.
Oh, I'm glad you asked me about it because it's my favorite, the endurance level, let's call it. So which is RPE of 3-4, which is basically your zone 2, right? This is where all the majority of your regular continuous workouts are coming into play here. The upper limit of your intensity that is going to be a longer distance race, either not really a marathon because you really want to push it during your marathon, but a long distance triathlon or even multi-day events, or even ultra marathons. You try to stay in that low endurance and still pushing your body, but keeping it that moderate effort.
Yeah, exactly. And after zone 2, there's like a jump in intensity to this third level. And depending on the scales that you look at, sometimes there's a middle zone between endurance and then what this third zone is that we're defining today, which is that threshold zone. So this threshold zone is where the pace really starts to increase. If you're racing, this might be like your half marathon at most, but anything longer won't qualify as threshold really. So your average heart rate, power, and pace here is for that sweet spot of like 40 to 60 minutes max. So FTP when you're cycling is also like that wattage would be another thing that you could measure here for threshold. And this on the rate of perceived exertion scale from 1 to 10 would be hard, and it would kind of be 5 to 6, something that you won't be able to do for more than an hour necessarily, but also it would be not too difficult to do for 15 minutes.
And next up is when you really start pushing the pace. And this is a pretty fun zone because it doesn't last too long. Generally, it's about 5 to 8 minutes. So that will be in running about kind of like a mile to maybe 3 kilometers. And that's just really max all out. So a general test for this is a max field run field test. This is kind of a good reference of what your VO2 max is. And like I said, this is a hard effort. So this is about a 7 to 8 RPE. So this is going to feel very hard.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have had a VO2 max workout or at least heard of the essence of them. And a very common, like I think the off the shelf is 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, 4 times. That's kind of like very, very promoted as one of those core VO2 max workouts. And yeah, you were right on, Andrew. Sort of, you can't do this effort for more than 8 minutes.
And the spicy effort, the last level here, is anaerobic. This is one where you kind of can't really spend more than 1 minute in. It's very intense, 9 to 10 on the RPE scale. You just want to puke at the end of it. Your heart rate's maxed out. And to be honest, I only get to this a couple times a season. I'm a nice low, slow burning engine. I don't do too many of these workouts, but I do think they are beneficial to work that other system, your lactate production. You're trying to shed that lactate as well. Your body really has to learn how to do that on those reps. But I've done in the past like hill reps or stairs. Those are good ways to get that anaerobic threshold up. And it's like, again, 30 seconds up, walk down, or you do your stairs, you get to that max heart rate, and then you walk down. So it's very quick and sprint-like efforts.
Yeah. So that's great. So we've really defined the 5 categorized zones that we'll be talking about, but this episode specifically is for that recovery time after our most intense sessions. So we're really focusing not on recovery or endurance, but only on threshold, VO2 max, and anaerobic work. Because what the literature is now showing, what research is showing, and Training Peaks is promoting this as well, is that each of these different systems, when you train them, requires a different amount of recovery time. Not only that, but it requires a different amount of recovery time based on what your next intense session is as well. So an example would be there, just before we really dig into the details, is let's say day 1, you do a threshold. The recovery time to do your next threshold or your next VO2 max can be slightly different because you're using different zones and systems for each of those workouts. So we'll get into a little bit more detail, but that's the essence of what we're talking about today, is how to best sprinkle in those intensity sessions so your body can recover, because really what we want to be doing is maximizing recovery and also that intensity so that we can continue building our fitness.
Yeah, looking at the data here, and they had some really good charts in this article, and we'll reference it in the show notes. But one thing, and it made me feel good, was looking at the chart for threshold workouts. If you look at that chart, if you do a threshold workout, the time for recovery for another threshold workout is the recovery time of over 72 hours, and for an anaerobic session, it would be around 6 hours that you can do an anaerobic session after that threshold session. Or if you were planning a VO2 max session, it would be just slightly more than 24 hours. And I've said this before in past episodes that in my marathon blocks, these threshold workouts are some of the scariest workouts to me. And I know going into them, I'm always super scared because the energy cost, and this is something that they mentioned in this article, the energy versus mechanical cost of these different sessions. The energy cost of this threshold session is huge, and the time to do another one reflects that long 72 hours before you should even think about trying another one.
Yeah, that's what I found super interesting. I realized, even with structured training plans, which is such a crazy idea, that, they book those specific threshold workouts or VO2 workouts on specific days because I could imagine they account for this type of lag in between recovery sessions. That way you could optimize your performance on a week by week basis, and they're not stacking like, okay, you're gonna do a VO2 workout on the Friday and then Saturday hit it again with a threshold, right? It's counterintuitive and could lead to injury.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I think the biggest learning for me was the difference between recovery times for that next workout, depending on what that next workout is. And maybe we can go down the list. Hopefully, it's not too much of a data dump, but I do think it's critical for everybody to understand. So, if you have a threshold workout, the recovery time for your next anaerobic session, VO2 max session, and threshold session are different. So if you've done day one, a threshold session, your recovery time to the next threshold session can be up to and around 72 hours or 3 days. From a threshold session to the next VO2 max session, that can be about 24 hours. So you could actually do sort of back-to-back days, but it could be a little bit longer. So 1 or 2 days from threshold to VO2 max. But it's shorter for a threshold into anaerobic. So threshold into really high, like 1 minute on, 1 minute off type of work, which can be 6 to 12 hours. So you could even do a threshold session in the morning and then a little bit of sprint work in the evening, which to me is wild just hearing about that, because the next threshold session shouldn't be for another like 2 to 3 days, for example, to allow that specific system to recover.
Yeah, it's super cool because you could, like I said, optimize it. You could sneak in that little bit of speed work, some sprints, and then get on with your day and still be, adequately recovered in the next couple of days to hit another threshold, even on, a different sport if you're going from biking to running.
Yeah, exactly. So then moving to a VO2 max. So if you did a VO2 max workout right now, today, the next possible high intensity session that you could do is actually a threshold session, because VO2 max, you're at like that 7-8 really hard intensity. The next high intensity session you could do is a threshold where it's a little bit of a longer and slightly less hard and less intense session. And like I say, that session, you could do that within 6 to 12 hours. So even the same day, VO2 max in the morning, threshold at night. VO2 max to VO2 max is the longest period in this bucket. So VO2 max, if you did one today, you would need to wait 36 to 48 hours based off this research to really fully recover from that. And then anaerobic is sort of in the middle of that, because you've done a pretty hard session. So doing the hardest 1 minute on, 1 minute off is actually in the middle of that, with 1 day to kind of 1.5 days between that and between your VO2 max and your anaerobic session.
Yeah, and then just to cap it off, just to kind of give you the whole picture, then if you're doing an anaerobic session, so really that crazy fast session, most likely sprints or like very short intervals, then the shortest recovery would be then going to that threshold session, which would be in that 12 to 24 hour range. So about a day, and you can try to tackle that threshold workout. And then within 24 hours to 36 hours, so maybe the next night, if you've done this in the morning, you can do a VO2 max session. And then for that same, to tackle maybe another anaerobic session, you would need about 48 hours to 72 hours to try to really tackle that high end, to be ready to, really kick it down the track and do those 100-meter sprints.
Yeah, and what I find really interesting here is threshold and VO2 max. If you do, it's possible to have a shorter window because they're not at the peak intensity. But an anaerobic, at a minimum, you need 12 to 24 hours, whereas a threshold or a VO2 max, your next intense session, depending on what it is, at a minimum can be 6 to 12 hours. So you could actually do an AM PM, where it's a little tougher if you do sprints in the morning to hit another really hard session in the evening. So interesting there. The other thing I think is critical is everybody hears of the Norwegian method, double threshold days, that sort of thing. And the only reason that at the peak of endurance sports and like track athletes like your Jakob Ingebrigtsens is because they're getting paid to do this. They've been doing it for years and they've really built up the volume and the wherewithal to withstand those workouts. But realistically, an amateur endurance athlete or somebody starting out should not be flirting with double threshold days. It's probably a recipe for disaster. If you really want to sprinkle in a ton of intensity, you can explore doing some of these mix and matching back-to-back days, but they shouldn't be the exact same session.
Yeah, that's very true. I kind of do want to dabble into it though, just to see how it feels to die a little bit at the end of a day. But have you guys ever heard of I've had prescribed workouts. I'm just wondering your opinion. I've had prescribed workouts like speed workouts where you start off a couple intervals at, let's call it anaerobic, and then you go into your normal threshold workout or longer repped workout, and it kind of feels like it's that easier pace compared to your sprinting that you were doing, maybe 10 minutes earlier. I feel like that kind of is maybe the same idea, but a little bit more micro within a workout.
Yeah, and I've seen that for sure on cycling workouts where there's some intense like on and offs at the start to really warm your body up. But what I would argue is that the warm up, it might be like VO2 max numbers at anaerobic interval length. So it's not quite as intense as if the true like anaerobic session of like level 5 as hard as you can go for 30 seconds 20 times is different than VO2 max for 40 seconds 3 times. So
That's
I think
a good
that
point.
it's
Yeah.
still treated as a warm up, but I do agree there is benefit to having some faster paces or more power output in your warm up spikes so that when you actually get into, for example, the threshold or VO2 max speeds or intensities, they don't feel quite as hard because you just spiked it a little bit more beforehand.
Kind of like tricking your brain too. Like, oh, this is slower than what I just did, so I'm fine.
Yeah, I think that's a good technique for one, rate of perceived exertion. It kind of helps you feel like, oh, this pace is a little bit more manageable. And also for heart rate, I think boosting your heart rate up a little bit at the beginning helps you kind of have that nicer, steady line once you actually get into that working session. So I think that is a really good thing to try to do before, sometimes I don't always do it, but warming up is always the move and will help you in that main set. I do want to put a nice disclaimer here and just emphasis on all of these things with recovery. They'll vary a lot based on the individual. And just because, Tyler is able to bounce back from that VO2 max session in around the recovery time that we're suggesting here, maybe for you, it takes you an extra day or two to recover, and that's completely okay. These are kind of those minimum recovery times of being able to do an effective exercise of that category again. It's not saying that at this point you are definitely ready and should go smash that workout. Make sure that your body is feeling ready to get a good effective workout in before you do it.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect disclaimer, and I think that's key, especially for people who might be a little bit more novice, starting to get some of these intense sessions into their training plan, into their sport. It's just important that when you go to tackle one of these workouts, you're putting 100% effort into it if you can. Your hard days should be hard. Your easy days should be easy. We've emphasized that in a number of podcast episodes, and I think Andrew, you live by that. When you see your easy days, they're close to my paces. When you see their hard days, you're close to the speed of light. So it's definitely something that should be individualized, and you should be listening to your body. Now, there was a point that you made, which I, reading through this article, kind of just read over it, which was the mechanical cost versus energy cost. And now I want to dive a little bit more into that because you mentioned it, Andrew, and I think it's a really interesting topic.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite quotes of the whole article, and something that I was like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And to me, when I was reading it, like that mechanical cost, and when I think of like an anaerobic, a VO2 max session, during the session, you are like, my legs are on fire. I just want to stop pushing on these pedals. I want to stop running. But then once you finish and get a small break in, you feel pretty okay. You get your breath back pretty quick and you're able to kind of bounce back into another one. Where that energy cost, threshold sessions, they're very hard. But you feel in control. You feel in control of that pace that you're going, and you feel like you can maintain it for a pretty good amount of time. But then once you finish and kind of that extended effort catches up with you, you really feel it. So that comparison I really liked in this article.
Yeah, and I think it makes total sense when you start looking at the recovery time, when you think of yourself spending on that budget of mechanical versus energy. When you spend a ton in energy cost on a threshold workout, you need to wait for that bank to refill, but you could go out and spend some of that mechanical budget you have in an anaerobic session pretty quickly. Whereas if you've done a VO2 max, you're sort of spending a little bit of both, but you could go and spend a little bit more energy. You could go and spend a little bit more mechanical, as long as you're not spending both at the same time again really quickly. So I think that's a good way to conceptualize the concepts that we've talked about, which is you can't like double dip on mechanical back to back in intense workout sessions if you're not giving yourself adequate time to reload, really.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. Actually, I'm a big mechanical and electrical kind of guy, so it's clear to me now. Clear as.
So we've talked a lot about like output, but there's also that recovery and like being able to gauge when you're ready to go back in. And we talked about it just a second ago about how it's individualized. You got to listen to your body, but there will be signs of inadequate recovery, right? So I think the big thing that I see is decreased performance in certain workouts if I'm stretching myself a little bit too far. And a really good example of this is if you go out and you do a really hard session on the weekend, and then your Tuesday workout. So if you do a really long run or a marathon pace on a Sunday, and then your Tuesday is a VO2 max or another threshold, that's when I see it the most of like my body still needs a little bit of recovery because my paces just aren't there, or it's much harder to get to those expected paces that I have. What are some signs that you guys might be overtrained slightly?
One of the signs, and this, I got hit with this multiple times this training block, and that is increased susceptibility to illness, where let's say maybe you were sick before or have been really putting in those miles, and then you do a really good workout, you feel pretty decent and you do pretty close to what you were expecting, but then a day or two after, you just feel a little under the weather, and it almost feels like you just can't shake this illness. You give it a couple days, you get better, and then you try to do another hard session, and you're just on that illness yo-yo, and you can't get rid of the sickness. So that's a good sign that maybe you need to pull back and you aren't quite ready for those sessions.
Another one too that is a good point actually, that we all get hit with, I think, at least once during the winter block, is, that you're pushing, you're more susceptible to the outside conditions, work, life, even the weather, right? You're pushing yourself to that limit, but also you get overtired and overstrained and you get sick at the end of the day. But I think another one too is just general fatigue, just day-to-day stuff. Like I said, work getting in the way, life getting in the way. Then you're still trying to play catch up and crushing those workouts. Big emphasis on playing catch up is not a recipe that will do you any good. You think it does in the moment, but again, I guess it's another yo-yo of you're always playing catch up, and you're at that revolving door of I'm tired, but I have to go out and work out, and then you just know that you're not performing the way you want to, and then you're just like, oh well, I'm just going to keep going, and that's just recipe for disaster.
For sure. And that disaster that strikes is overtraining, right? At the end of the day, more isn't always better. And I think when we talk about overtraining, and look, we're deep into like the culture of pushing yourselves. A lot of our friends are doing the same. We're trying hard things. We're signing up for races, more, tracking each other's data on Strava. There's a social pressure there. There's so much that goes into always wanting to do more. But if you start getting into that gradual overtrained level, you're going to hit a plateau. Your body's going to be fatigued. You're going to be breaking down. And despite the fact that you're still putting out so much output, so much effort, you're not improving because your body's not sticking with and adapting to that. And things will just end up getting harder. And that's where you blow up. You either get injured or you get disinterested because you're putting so much into it, but you're seeing no progress because you're not, looking at the other side of the coin, which is your body needs to adapt. And the only way it adapts is through recovery.
Yeah, very well said. I don't necessarily get the bug with people's workouts and seeing that, but what is tricky sometimes is seeing all the fun and exciting races that people have on their calendar and just wanting to put them all on my calendar and just race every weekend. It's so tempting, but you have to resist the urge to just always do those all out sessions because you'll have to pay back that debt at some point.
With the body and with the wallet, because those races are not cheap.
All right, so let's chat a little bit about what we can do to have effective recovery so that we aren't repaying the debt and we're actually depositing into our bank account of energy, so that we're always feeling good when we are ready to smash those workouts. And number one, and this is, I think, the GOAT of the recovery methods, and it's nice and simple, it is sleep. If you are an endurance athlete, you want to prioritize your good 7 to maybe 9 hours of sleep and make sure you aren't cutting that sleep short. Any more than once a week is way too much if you want your performance.
So while you were saying that, I Googled it quickly, which is Eliud Kipchoge and how much he sleeps in a day. So a little quiz question. You can both provide your best guess. How much do you think Eliud Kipchoge aims to sleep every night?
Minimum 12. That guy is an absolute freak. He's a god. He's just he's a calm guy. I think 12.
I'm going to go with 8. I think that his zone 1 runs for him are considered sleep, so that's an extra 2 hours. So let's go for 10 hours.
You're right on. 10 hours is the number that he reported saying in an interview sometime around the latest Olympics.
I wish.
Which is wild, but I mean, he's dedicated only to running. So certainly he might not have the stress of having to wake up at 6 a.m. and commute into the office, but he definitely has the stress of waking up at 6 a.m. and having to run like 30K a day. So someone like him at the peak of the sport is prioritizing rest. It's important that we all do too. Get as much sleep as you can, I think is the key here. And also, as you increase your volume and intensity, you should be trying to increase your sleep as well. And we talked about it in, I think it was maybe the 72-hour checklist before race day or the taper episode, which was when you're tapering down, take those hours that you're no longer spending on the bike or running and switch them to the bed so that you're sleeping during that extra time that you have in your calendar. Because going into race day, that's when it's most important to get your sleep.
Another good one that I like doing, active recovery sessions. Throw those in no matter what you do. Easy to do in the summer, even in the winter. You could play some outdoor sports. Same thing, rollerblade, walk the dog, go for a leisure swim, play some volleyball or even tennis if you feel lucky. But I mean, just staying active, but on your recovery days, I think is still a plus because you're moving your body, you're keeping everything loose, you don't stiffen up, and better than just sitting on the couch and urging and waiting for that next workout.
Yeah, totally. And I think one key for me, and it's a big focus of mine this year, is like the strength training and the prescribed physio training. We talked about energy and mechanical cost of workouts, and we talked about how each of them are a bank. energy, you can only really increase the volume and the size of that bank by exercising and building that good base and really just becoming a better athlete. Mechanical's the same, but it's done differently. So mechanical, you can actually start to increase that bank by building strength, by building stability, by exercising your muscles, making sure your tendons are strong. All of that will help kind of improve that mechanical bucket.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I don't know if you guys seen in the Strava investigation, but I did some nickel and dimes this week, and I got to get back to it because it was pretty poor. I haven't done any of those in a while, and I could tell.
So nickel and dimes, what is it again? I know one of them is push-ups. What's the other exercise
Yeah,
for nickel and dimes?
nickel and diamond. You're just picking up nickels and dimes off the floor. You're doing some pull-ups, 5 pull-ups, and 10 push-ups, and you do like minute rounds. So whatever it takes you to do the 5 and then 10, and then you rest for the remaining 40 seconds, and then you do it as many times as possible. I just like doing it within a recovery run or a general aerobic run, just to get that 5 to 10 minutes of a little bit of strength training on your upper body with obviously your own body weight, and then you move along with your run, and it feels like I get sore after too, so it's great. I know it works.
That's ideal. And you don't want to become a shriveled up T-Rex of an endurance athlete. You still got to have those wings so you can fly on the bike.
Exactly.
Another one, kind of the second pillar, I would say, other than sleep, is kind of nutrition and hydration. I know when I was first getting into endurance sports, I used to just be a fasted runner. No matter the session, I would go out there, no carbs, no gels, and I would just try to smash it as hard as I could. And let me tell you, I would pay for it later on.
That's a dead man walking right there.
And especially depending on your sessions, I would do a lot of threshold sessions, which just depletes your glycogen stores. So you do want to make sure that you are refilling those glycogen stores, getting a lot of protein in post workouts to rebuild your muscles so that you are nice and fueled and recovered for that next session. And Tyler and I may have made some, simple carb decisions for the carb load, but you do want some good, healthy, complex carbs, good, clean protein on the day-to-day basis, because it does help and makes you feel better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think making sure that you're fueling properly is one of the big learnings that most endurance athletes go through in their first year. And even we have some friends who, even with all the knowledge we're trying to share and kind of the food we'll force on them during a workout, they still end up bonking, and it's just inevitable. But whether you're doing a really long exercise and you need those carbs during, but also after, before, it's really just about fueling the fire.
Now, Tyler, I have a question for you. We've been talking a lot about how to effectively stack different types of workouts. And this is a bit more of an advanced technique when you're really trying to push to the next level in whatever you're training for. But I'd like to know, especially from the triathlon perspective, you're kind of getting into that Ironman block, you're a few weeks in now, do you have any very specific Ironman training sessions where you're really trying to combo these different workouts? And can you kind of walk us through one of those workouts and maybe when during the session or during the block you would do it?
That's a great question. I think, optimizing those triathlon workouts for the specificity of your race is a really important thing to do, especially during your training block. But kind of like running, your first few weeks is just general endurance training. Then you start getting into those, let's call it peak blocks, where we do those specific training sessions. So that famous brick workouts that you always hear us talk about is a bike and a run. So you bike, X amount of hours or minutes, and then you jump right into the run to simulate that race day feeling, right? So you want to simulate what your muscles will be feeling on race day, and it's a very different feeling going from biking to running, different set of muscles, different position in the body. And then you'll see specifically the time of week as well. I do it is usually at the back end of the week. So for me, it's my weekends. Is I'll do usually a long session on the Saturday, which will be This year, is more geared towards those brick workouts. So every long bike, I have a brick run after. Even if it's a short run, I'm just trying to get those legs used to rolling right off of the bike and not just, vegging at home or taking a nap. So I think that'll be really the next step is finding those legs off the bike. And then, for example, the Sunday you follow that up with, again, you're doing an endurance effort, nothing too crazy, no threshold or, VO2 specific pieces, but the Sunday you'll do just a long run, zone 2, stay on the legs even though they're tired. So again, it simulates that end of race feel when you're most tired, but you split it out between a couple days, so you're obviously not taxing your legs or your body that difficult.
No, sorry, I'm a little confused. These are not high intensity. Why aren't you doing high intensity multi-sport single day kind of workouts to simulate in the race?
Yeah, I guess it depends on you're kind of really playing with volume versus intensity. So if you go mega volume, you kind of lower that intensity, which still ends up being kind of hard. But if you middle of the week, let's say I'll do my higher intensity but lower time session. So let's say it'll be an hour or under, which will be sometimes even some within the week, but those are when I'm going to do the high intensity. But really when I'm increasing volume, you'll try to keep that. Even your race pace at a full distance triathlon, is endurance zone. So you're really trying to keep that. Technically, actually, I've read a training plan, believe it or not, and every weekend, every Saturday, they call for Ironman race pace work, which is upper zone 2. So you're never going to get out above your kind of 152 beats per minute. So you're still trying to keep in that sweet spot, but at the end of the day, it'll become hard over 4 or 5 hours.
Of course. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So for clarity for other, maybe people who are just beginning their triathlon journey, you personally are not doing high intensity multi-sport workouts.
True. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something that other people do, or is this just common for triathletes to never do a VO2 max where they do some VO2 max on the bike and then switch over halfway through to the
that's a good point. I'm just thinking of my previous years and doing it shorter distances, let's call it, or being more of a novice, and I still never really did that. I've seen previously you'll do an interval piece on the bike, let's say 40 minutes, and then you'll do an easy zone 2 run 20 minutes after. So you have your hour workout, you have your piece within that bike session, but you still kind of have your easy-ish run afterwards, which will still, again, end up being a little bit difficult, but you're still not trying to push it too much. Or vice versa, right? You could do a zone 2 run 45 minutes, and then you do a nice couple minute warm up, and then you do a 15-minute piece or something like that, just to see that high intensity off of the bike. So there is some, I think, iterations of that, but I've never seen back-to-back hard sessions, unless maybe you're Hayden Wilder or Lionel Sanders.
Yeah, so only the pros. It'd be kind of like a Jakob and Ingebrigtsen.
Yeah, double threshold. There you go.
Okay, Andrew, same kind of question, but for the marathoner in the room. What are your strategies around key intense kind of maybe back-to-back sessions that you might do?
Yeah, one of my favorite, and I do this at least once, maybe twice, depending how the block is going, every single marathon block, and that is doing a threshold workout on a Saturday. Generally, that will be about 4 to 7 miles at half marathon pace. And then the next day, doing a long run at either pretty high end of zone 2, or ideally doing a progressive long run where I'm starting out slow, a nice warm up, and then moving towards my marathon pace. And really, the goal of this session is to get close to that race pace after a big glycogen depletion day on that threshold session and seeing how I feel and the body reacts. The reason why I do this session, everyone has heard about the dreaded wall at 30 kilometers in the marathon. And I think incorporating this, and again, if this is your first marathon block, I would not recommend this workout. But I think this prepare you for that 30 kilometers and to not hit the wall in a very good way, and has allowed me to avoid that wall or finishing marathon strong. So I think it's a good session to be tired when you do that long run, because you'll be very tired at 30 kilometers and you still need to push for another 12.
Couldn't have said it better. That's amazing. And I think I see resemblances between that workout and those 2 days of those Ironman training days. So it's all to get that progressive overload, I think, and performing under those tired legs.
And just like a note on that energy bank, I will often do this right before a slightly down week. So, because I am really pushing that energy bank kind of right to the limit with these 2 back-to-back sessions. So I like to have a nice down week with mostly zone 2 the next week so that I can ramp back up into training. And I don't just go right back into another hard week.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think for others, maybe if you don't have this structured into your plan, but you want to even try something like this, dip your toe in the water. I did during my last marathon block, where it was a tune-up race, the half marathon in Kingston. And then that same evening, I went out for a run just to test the legs and feel how they would feel coming through that like maybe 30-kilometer mark. So it was a half marathon in the morning, all out effort. And then an easier run, but still with a little bit of testing myself near the end of that run just to see how the legs would react to full glycogen depletion and a nice stomach full of pizza as well.
Yeah, I remember when you did that. That was freaky. The Strava investigators really had their magnifying glasses out on that day. You did it. You crushed a sub 90 half, and then you just had a nice little jaunt around the canal later that evening as a dessert. That was pretty freaky.
Yeah, it was very freaky. Now, moving over a little bit to chat time, I think that kind of covers what we wanted to cover from the intensity session sort of literature that we wanted to bring up. Speaking about halves, Jansen Batista, one of the boys in motion out of Toronto. If you don't know him, he runs out of Toronto. He's somebody who's very, very consistent with his running. His plan is basically run 5K a day for forever. Now, he was traveling recently, and he ended up doing, in 3 weeks, he did 3 half marathons in 3 countries, which is pretty cool. The day before he left, I think he did a half here in Toronto, and then he flew to Japan, did a half in Japan, then flew to the Philippines, did a half in the Philippines. And I think they progressively got harder, especially the one in the Philippines, because it was like 45 degrees. He had no idea where he was going, and there was a ton of elevation where he was. So he fully bonked on that one. But just pretty cool to see somebody doing something a little out of the ordinary like that, especially from a man like him who really only ever runs 5Ks.
That's freaky. He's a certified freak, that's for sure.
I think one of my favorite things from that was seeing on one of his posts, and I think it really encapsulates the spirit of BIM, is that I believe it was the one in Japan where he said he was eating at a cafeteria or something, and he convinced a random person to run the half marathon with him that only had planned to do, I think he said like 10 or 15K or something. So just do hard things, get your friends or strangers to do them with you, and have lots of fun doing it. I think it's awesome.
That's awesome. I just got chills. I didn't know that story. That's pretty cool.
I mean, he works in sales, so I'm not surprised he was able to sell somebody on the idea of going out and running and jaunting a half with him. But just so cool. And those are the kind of like things that I feel like Strava was made for. It's great for tracking your own progress, but to see people like doing these international cool things, fun things, is just wicked to see. I also told him I was going to give him a shout out on the pod, so I had to. A week or two late, but we got there.
I mean, if he makes it to the end of the episode, he'll hear it.
Love it. A nice little treat, that nice BIM shout out. But I mean, he did something freaky, so he deserves it. But yeah, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Boys in Motion. We hope you got lots of good insight. Smash your next session and do the proper recovery so that you can convince some strangers to join you for the ride.
And I don't know why you're not following yet, but don't forget to follow us on social media, subscribe to our podcast, and join our Strava community. Stay connected to the boys.
Exactly. And share this episode with a friend if you think they're not doing enough intense sessions or planning them poorly. But do remember, we're sharing our experiences and our knowledge. We're not medical professionals, so do consult with an expert for personalized advice or medical advice.
And as always, train hard, recover even harder, and keep moving and grooving. Until the next time, stay in motion.